Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to today's session on Inside the Strategic Vision for HathiTrust. I am Melissa Stewart, HathiTrust Member Relations Specialist, and we are so excited that you are all here with us today to learn about our strategic vision. You've probably noticed that this session is in Zoom webinar, so participants are not able to share their screen or be seen or heard through their camera. If you have for any conversation or any technical difficulties, you can communicate with us through the chat. Or also if you have any questions during the session, please type them into the Q&A. Our marketing and communications strategist, Jessica Rohr, is here to monitor the chat and the Q&A. And after the presentation, she will be reading your questions aloud to Mike and Claire for them to address. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Claire to get us started. Oh, one more thing I forgot. Closed captioning is turned on today, so you can press the CC button and see closed captions. These are Zoom generated closed captions, so HathiTrust will be spelled many different ways, but never correctly. Now I will turn it over to Claire.
Thank you so much, Melissa. My name is Claire Stewart. I am the Dean of Libraries and University Librarian at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and had the pleasure of co-chairing the strategic visioning process with Mike Furlough. Over to you, Mike.
Hi, everybody. I'm Mike Furlough. I'm the Executive Director of HathiTrust, or as it will be shown in chat, HathiTrout. So I'm here to, first of all, just get us started and welcome you to this session. I want to say thank you for being here. It's been a while since we've had a chance to talk with you about the strategic vision. And I wanted to share with you first the topics that we'll be covering this afternoon before we get to the question and answer. I'm going to jump right in at the start and talk about what the strategic vision says we'll be doing, what the directions are, and really talk a little bit about how it centers our collection as the focus of our work in the coming years. Following that, I'll shed a little bit of light on the process we used over the last year to come to these decisions. Claire will talk with us about the findings of this process beyond the directions that we've established. And then I'll follow up with a few notes about actions we're taking in the near term and the long term to carry this out. And then we'll have discussion. This is scheduled to go up until the top of the hour. We'll go no longer than that if we need to. If we end up cutting a little bit short, that's fine. And I believe a recording will be made available after the session as well. So Melissa, you can go ahead to the next slide. I just wanted to say to folks that we are really thrilled about what we're sharing with you today. 2023, many of you have heard me say this, 2023 was our 15th anniversary. And as we entered that year, as we got started in that year, we were starting to think about how to develop a new strategic vision to kick off the second 15 years, that one that would ensure that our work is aligned with members and one that was aligned with users and with our changing world. And this resulting vision we think of being very ambitious, one that will take sustained effort, one that where the classic metaphor of the marathon, not the sprint, applies. But I want to emphasize too that while we're kicking off the next 15 years, it is also true that the strategic direction really focuses on, to continue the metaphor, the miles we're in right now. So this is really focused on priorities for the next 3 to 5 years. Where we ended up in this work is in many ways a recommitment to our core work, but it also represents a kind of a recalibration as well. It provides us with some clarity about what's most important and will help us tune programmatic work to ensure that we're effectively doing everything we can to support our goals. So on the next slide, Melissa, I'll want to start talking about centering the collection. And notably, our plans call for us to center our work and attention on this collection because that is the most distinctive and unique element of HathiTrust. It's the resource that has been created through our membership contributions, and it's really a common good resource for our members and for users around the world. We're making commitments to grow it and to expand it and to make it more useful for users and members, and we'll be continuing to carry out our preservation mission to ensure that this record of scholarship remains accessible into the future. There are 4 directions that are part of the strategic vision. On the next slide, you can see a little graphic that represents them. Those 4 directions here are to focus on increasing access and use, expansion and diversification of the collection, enrichment of text and metadata, and investing in the core enabling infrastructure that underlines all of that. Also on the screen, you see a link to the Strategic Vision website, which has recently been updated with some new information. This diagram suggests that these are in some ways separable, but in fact, I think they're all interlocking. They relate to each other. They reinforce each other. Each of these directions or goals is set out, or rather supported by a set of objectives that is more tactically oriented statements that offer a bit of insight into how we will accomplish that work over the coming years. And I'm going to talk about those in a little bit of detail over the next few minutes. I just want to say that as I talk about these, I'm going to be talking both about what we're sure we're going to do, and I'll be speculating on some things we might do as well. And I'll try to be clear about where I'm being definite and where I'm offering some examples. So the first direction is focusing on increasing access and use. And it states on this next slide our intention to expand access to and increase use of copyrighted, open, and public domain works in the HathiTrust collection. Now, this is fairly broadly worded. I want to unpack it and just simplify it to say that this really says we're going to make the collection more useful for more people. An important element of that, it will be to ground our work in a deep understanding of users and members. So we're really focusing now on user research. The strategic vision itself was a pretty big investigation into member needs and a research project. We'll want to make sure that anything we do is grounded in a clear understanding of need and impact. Another element of this direction will be to continue to identify works that are in the public domain and open them up for broad use. That's something we've been doing for a number of years through copyright review. But that's not going to be the only way we focus on expanding access or increasing access. We want to look for ways to make the copyrighted collection more useful for readers, and there are various ways we could do that. One thing we could be doing will be to extend access to copyrighted materials through resource sharing arrangements. We have been taking part in a project with the University of California that's known as Project Lend. This is a larger project that UC is leading, focused on ways to focusing on examinations of how libraries could more lawfully expand access to copyrighted materials. It's funded by the Mellon Foundation. It's been rooted in a really extensive research study of users in the way that they interact with digital collections. It's being supplemented by research into a range of copyright issues related to fair use, but also exceptions that are granted to libraries under at least the USA Copyright Act. Now, Project Lend is still in progress. There are not findings published yet, but it's helping to illuminate possible pathways for us to expand lawful access, as well as some of the challenges that users encounter when they're navigating the information ecosystem. So this will help us formulate not just new services and service plans, but it's refining our understanding of how HathiTrust exists within the broader ecosystem of information resources, how users need to find us, how they need to interact with us in that space. The next directions is focused on expansion and diversification of the collection. And this means in the sense of subject matter, the materials and the sources. Our focus will remain on book and serial content. That's been our historical strength and is one we'll focus on going forward. This goal to expand the content of the collection is not strictly new. It's one that we've talked about for a long time. It's one that takes a fair amount of sustained effort. There are a range of objectives laid out here that will seek to help us and our members understand what the collection is, help us understand it more fully, identify materials that could be valuable to add to this aggregation. The Digital Collection Strategy Working Group, which was in place for until about a year ago, previously adopted a set of collection principles that are intended to help us develop the collection in ways that are responsive to broad societal needs in a changing world. And that's represented in these objectives as well. To carry out this work, to really accomplish this work of expansion of the collection, we'll have to continue working with our members to shape a strategy that's more proactive. And we'll need to continue to work with a wider range of collection holders, and that includes possibly non-members as well as potentially publishers or other content holders, so that we can identify sources of materials that will strengthen the HathiTrust collection. But I think this is also important. I believe that when we add materials to the HathiTrust collection, those materials become more valuable and more helpful in themselves, right? By inclusion in a large aggregation, more users can find them, they're more accessible and more useful. To lead all of this work around collection development, we'll be seeking a new full-time collection strategist to add to the HathiTrust team. We're hoping to begin that recruitment process later in the summer. The third direction is focused on enrichment of text and metadata. And in some ways, this is possibly the most ambitious of all in that it calls for us to enable new forms of discovery, access, and use of the HathiTrust collection through large-scale enhancements of the text and the metadata. But the pace of change and honestly, sometimes the degree of hype in the technological, evolving technologies these days makes this one probably the hardest to pin down in terms of saying we're exactly going to do this or that. It does, however, represent a fairly fundamental adjustment to our orientation to the collection and the metadata that we steward. This builds on previous work from another member-led group, the Metadata Community Strategy Working Group, that recommended we actively steward these data assets, undertaking large-scale assessments of quality, of the completeness of bibliographic metadata, updating, correcting, and extending these records to improve discovery. In other words, being more proactive in the ways that we steward this content, this metadata with our members, and not simply accept it and then hope that it makes sense for people. The strategic vision calls for us to accomplish these enhancements in part through investments in deployment of computational tools and methods. I want to be clear, that's not about adopting magical thinking. There's not an AI black box that's going to be labeled HathiTrust into which we pour everything and out comes incredibly clear and rich metadata and accurate metadata and content. But we can use machine learning methods to assist us, but it's going to involve a fair amount of human work as well. And that will take continuing investments in our systems, in our infrastructure, and the expertise of the organization. So that brings me to the last of the 4 strategic directions. In this one, we're focused on investing in core enabling infrastructure, looking to reinforce our technological and operational foundations to preserve and steward the collection in ways that are responsible, that are sustainable, and effective. This is a recognition that any innovation we want to pursue has to be matched with core investments, right? Investments in our activities and functions that sustain the rest of our work. It reinforces the others, but it also identifies some specific systems that we should be focusing on, such as improvements in search and discovery, ingest, and analytics. And I think to build on the last direction around enrichment of text and metadata, there's an objective here that I think reinforces this point, that if we're going to explore how machine learning technologies can improve services, can improve content, then we also have to invest in our capacity to assess those technologies as well as develop them and integrate them into our service offerings in ways that are both responsible and ethical as well. So that's a lot. That's the 4 directions that are in our strategic vision right now. And I want to then at this point kind of turn over and talk a little bit about how we arrived at these decisions. So this was a process that we engaged in over the last year. It started in early 2023. And Melissa, you can go on to the next, actually, you can go on to the HathiTrust Today slide. And I want to start here by talking about where we are now and how that influenced our thinking about this plan and about this process. It's important to note right now that HathiTrust doesn't really have any obvious direct peers. We have a lot of organizations that do work similar to ours and that we're similar to, but we operate in multiple ecosystems, infrastructural ecosystems, libraries, academic and research, digital preservation, academic research, cultural heritage organizations. There's just a wide group of folks that we interact with. And in our first 15 years, we've had notable successes. We've collected, preserved, and provided access to more than 18 million texts in over 400 languages. This remains one of the, if not the largest collection of digitized text stewarded for academic research. And over the past 15 years, our mission has not changed. The organization, however, has changed quite a bit, and the world we work in has changed quite a bit. And that's what we sought to understand as we started out on the strategic visioning process. I'd like to take a look at the membership first, but talk a little bit about how the organization has changed and the ways what questions that posed for us as we started. So when we began in 2008, there were about 24 different libraries, including the libraries of the University of California and the CIC, which is now known as the Big Ten Academic Alliance. All of these, or most of these, were large research-intensive universities engaged in mass digitization effort. In a few years, HathiTrust opened membership more broadly to include libraries that were not necessarily going to be scanning in large volumes or even scanning at all. And by 2019, we had 158 members. But over the last 5 years, growth has been really substantial. It's been faster than we had expected. Now we have over 213 members. Our history, or the long trend has been to increase membership, but we really had not seen that level of growth before. And it was driven in part by the pandemic and the fact that during the pandemic, we were offering emergency temporary access to the digital collections for libraries that couldn't service their collections as they normally would. But we also had changed our fee model for the 2020 year in a way that made it more affordable to become a member of HathiTrust. This became a way to make HathiTrust membership more valuable and more cost-effective for libraries that maybe had less expansive budgets. So this table here shows that we have had our fastest rate of growth has been among libraries in our tier 1, which references libraries that have budgets of less than $11.6 million a year. So we started out with only about 32, now we have over 80 of those. So it's not just a larger membership, but it's one with a greater diversity of institutional types, not simply research-intensive institutions, but also teaching-focused institutions, state flagships, regional publics, commuter colleges, residential colleges, colleges with tens of thousands of students, and those with a few hundred. So there's a larger number of members now who contribute to HathiTrust in ways that are different from our longer-standing members. So on the next slide, we have a couple of questions that we asked ourselves as we got started here. We wanted to, yeah, you can go ahead to the next slide, Melissa. There are many priorities of the founders, such as collection management, access, and preservation, that remained important, but we knew that new collaboration networks have evolved. There were wider-ranging coalitions and consortia that had emerged. And we wanted to think about how all of this was changing the value proposition for HathiTrust, or if it was changing the value proposition. And we wanted to ensure that with this broader membership, we were hearing from all of them and ensuring that we were aligned with the membership needs. So this exploration focused on a couple of key questions. The first is, how can we impact the world? Recognizing not just that it's membership, the membership has changed, but also the environment that we work in, the research landscape, the educational landscape, the social and political landscapes, technology, environment, all of this has shifted dramatically in the last 15 years. And the ways that we need to work in response need to be taken into account. We're a critical part of this infrastructure that supports research and libraries, so we need to strengthen that overall network, not just strengthen ourselves. So as we pondered this work, the question was like, what are the ways we should have an impact? And then that led us to the next question, what can we do uniquely, right? What is the stuff that we can do that no one else can? We have a big mission, a huge ambitious vision. People look to us as a possible solution for new and emerging problems. But we still remain a small organization, and we need to think critically about how we apply our resources and ensure that we're doing the things that will have the greatest impact. So that leads us to finally talking about this process. With that framing in mind, we launched a really intensive process starting in the spring of 2023. You can go to the next slide. And then we spent nearly a full year examining our accomplishments, the lessons of our first 15 years, the expansion, the experimentation. We wanted to take an honest look at how we've been successful, where we've been successful, where maybe we've not had the impact we hoped to, and where we were best poised to continue to make a difference. So this was a process that needed to involve the voices of members, non-members, governance groups, staff, non-affiliated experts. It was a fairly wide-ranging effort. So on the next slide, you can see the names of some people who helped see us through this work, the HathiTrust Strategic Visioning Task Force. I want to just note here that this was an incredible group of people. It was populated by folks who are library leaders, who are real experts and creative people, folks who are community leaders, who are, I would say, just incredibly dedicated, motivated, engaged, thoughtful, and were really on point throughout the entire year for this work. And I want to thank all of them for their commitment. They put in a lot of effort, and I'm glad to be able to acknowledge them today. One thing I'll also say is the affiliations that are noted on the screen were current at the time this group began. Some of these people have moved on to new roles and really interesting jobs since then, so take that in mind. This next slide, and the last one I'm going to cover for a little while, is to talk more in detail about what that process looked like. We started this work by working with contractors or consultants at Athenaeum 21, Megan Hurst and Christine Madsen, designed this program that was built around discovery and listening and investigation, leading through some synthetic work to describe vision and future states, and then finally a kind of a winnowing process, the part that was probably less fun, to make some decisions about what we were going to do and where we were going to have to make some decisions not to go forward. This process developed an enormous volume of data. There were over 60 hours of one-on-one interviews, over 45 hours of online and in-person workshops with the VTF, with the board, with the program steering committee, with staff. There was a survey that garnered nearly 300 responses. And this work also included 2 lightweight program assessments of our shared print program and the HathiTrust Research Center. So we learned a huge amount along the way. And in some ways, I think for me, the exploration was just as important as this end result. And I want to turn the mic over to Claire now so she can share with you and reflect on what some of these findings were and their implications for our future.
Thank you, Mike. I think we can go on ahead to the next slide, please, Melissa. So in the interest of time, we are really only going to have an opportunity to talk about a few of the key findings, but I wanted to share a bit more about how they emerged, how we delved in, and to pick just a few examples to talk about today. As Mike said, one of the activities of the vision development process was a survey deployed to both members and non-members, and we had 267 responses, of which 227 came from individuals who knew that they were from Hathi member institutions. So you're seeing here just a selection of some of the data that we gathered through the survey. Really interesting about this is that very little of what HathiTrust does, very few of its programs and activities are actually deemed not important. That would be that darker red orange all the way kind of over to the right with those very, very small percentages. So as you can see, most of Hathi programs and services are well above that 50% mark in the importance category, with a really decent showing at 75% and higher, actually, although some things were possibly not as well known as others. But if you go to the next slide, please, Melissa, it will become apparent that one thing was very, very clear, and that is that supporting access to the collection was consistently seen as the most important part of Hathi's work. The digital library itself, ETAS, copyright review, all of the things that contribute to our access mission, all of those things registered at 80% or higher in terms of importance. So this was a very clear finding. It was actually borne out across all of the instruments, not just the survey, but in the interviews as well. But there were other things that were a little bit more puzzling and took a while to parse. So preservation, for example, you see that highlighted here. It did not seem to register as highly as an important activity of HathiTrust, which was really something we did not expect. And we spent a good amount of time trying to understand what that meant, because for Hathi, our access mission is an extension, has always been traditionally an extension of our preservation mission. It's core to what we do to enable longer term and durable access. As the saying goes, if there's no preservation without access and no access without preservation, why were these things showing up so differently in that importance ranking? Next slide, please. So it started to make a little more sense as we looked deeper and we looked at this information through a different lens. And that was by examining how the depositing libraries responded to this question compared to how non-deposited libraries responded. So the N that you're seeing here is not the number of libraries that do this work, but the number of responses coming from those types of libraries. So as you can see here, here you start to see some really interesting patterns. Preservation is ranked as important or very important at a lower rate by non-depositing library respondents than it is by depositing libraries. So on this question, the survey framed preservation not as an element of the mission of HathiTrust, but as one of the services that it provides. And so our take on this is that non-depositing libraries rated this as less important as a service that they employ. But as we discussed it further, in particular with the visioning task force, it became very clear that that mission was still seen as very important by non-depositing libraries. Next slide, please. So here's yet another view into if we look at how our membership sorts out in terms of the preservation activities our members engage in through HathiTrust. Actually, at this point in time, most of our members neither deposit nor participate in shared print or deposit, and less than 15% do both. So as we started to think more about that high rating for access, we reflected on something that really started to come through in the interviews that A21 conducted, which was a not insignificant sentiment that indicated that some members were viewing HathiTrust more like a service they subscribed to than as a collaborative digital library building activity. But that attitude is a pretty nuanced one. And even though it helped explain why access was showing up so highly, I think it is still true that preservation and other digital library-like activities, those core things, other core things that are part of the mission, are enjoying healthy support. So personally, I find this a pretty remarkable testament to our overall unity that despite this, the very different relative rankings of various services, everything is still showing up with pretty strong support across the board. So we may have a more diverse, in terms of types of institution, a more diverse membership than we have ever before, but we still are all tending to rank a set of core services and core parts of our mission very highly. Next slide, please, Melissa. And to a certain degree, the opposite is also true. So although there are differences in how heavily members weight various aspects of our joint work, we did not see things emerge that clearly indicated that different types of libraries are expecting services that Hathi is not currently providing. So for example, since the pandemic, we've seen a lot of growth in member libraries that are from institutions that might be considered to have a stronger teaching focus, perhaps not as well represented historically in our membership, but really nothing emerged from interviews or surveys to indicate that these members need something that they're not already getting. It's really more a matter of degrees of support. So the diversity of types of organizations seems to be working for us as a member community. But it's clear we're also going to continue to need to have a flexible frame for what and how members contribute so that we can really sustain all of these activities. So even if collections contributors or those libraries that don't contribute collections continue to be, a growing part of our membership, they may have fewer they may have smaller budgets. But I think what we really need to understand in terms of our future sustainability is whether or not they can contribute expertise, staff time, service on committees. These are all things that have been historically really important in order to sustain the work of HathiTrust. So that is a challenge for us moving forward as a community to make sure that the way that we do our work meets our members where they are, and we continue to have robust ways to engage members, the staff, the faculty at all of our different member libraries. Next slide, please, Melissa. So we did actually talk about things. This is always good, right? We, as libraries, are always challenged to figure out what things we can stop doing. So we did want to reflect briefly, at least, on some of the things we talked about that we decided not to do. Next slide. We don't really have time today to talk in depth about all of these, but we certainly could go into them in this discussion if there was interest. But just to note that we talked about a lot of things, a lot of potential directions that had a compelling connection to Hathi that we gave some serious thought to, but ultimately decided not to do. We acknowledge that there is limited organizational capacity. As Mike said, our past success has really been rooted in our specialization and that very, very clear focus on specific formats and functions. So you see here just a few of the things that we considered but decided not to include in our strategic priorities and in our directions. So to pick two, leading copyright lobbying. So this is a robust field. There are lots of other groups who are already playing significant advocacy and lobbying roles. So Hathi needs to continue to lead by doing, but to make sure that it is working effectively with the advocacy communities that have an impact on Hathi. And we've done that most recently through the brief that we filed in the Hashat v. Internet Archive case, just to use as an example. We even considered some really radical ideas like shifting from not just shared ownership of the digital collection, but should we start talking about joint ownership model for the physical collections? So, it didn't take long before we recognized that the physical library collections are considered a monetary asset by our institutions. And it was not clear that there would be enough value to doing that to wade into what was sure to be a very, very complex set of legal issues and questions and frameworks that would come with that. So I'm going to skip the rest of these. As I said, we can come back to them. But just to give you a sense of the things that we did actually consider, but determined that we didn't need to pursue them. So next slide. And then, of course, there are questions that remain. There are things we know that are important, but the how, and I've seen already a couple of the things that have popped up that are starting to lead in a direction in our Q&A that are kind of how questions. We do have additional things that remain. Next slide. So among the things we very briefly canvassed, but which clearly need deeper interrogation, are the things that you see here on the screen. So as Mike noted, the membership of HathiTrust has changed really quite significantly in the past 5 years, and likely to the point that we need to have some focused discussion about that. What does growth actually mean, and how do we want to pursue that? Relatedly, as I said, particularly what's come to light in terms of capacity for members to contribute personnel time. Are we in the right place with our approach to governance and decision-making? How are we populating all of those committees? Do we have representation from all of the different types of members? And do they feel well represented in our governance processes? So both of those are going to feed into our longer-term planning around resilience and succession. The future of the organization, it really needs to represent all of us well. The membership continues to have a very strong commitment to equity and justice, but the reality is that our membership is predominantly drawn from historically white institutions. During the strategic visioning process, A21 and the members of the task force, we put a good amount of effort into trying to expand engagement with, in particular, with non-members from HBCUs and tribal colleges, and really without a lot of success. So we are aware that we really need to interrogate that, to spend some time to understand what that means, what can we learn from that, and then what does it mean for our work going forward. And finally, Mike touched on this briefly, probably at least a conversation unto itself, if not a visioning activity unto itself. Hathi has had a long commitment and a long engagement with non-consumptive or transformative, computationally intensive uses of this collection. And as technology advances, arguably there are even more potentially compelling directions to explore. So what makes sense? What should we consider? And in that, in that sphere, not just the what, but the how are critically important. I'm going to hand it back to Mike to talk about taking action.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you so much. I want to just wrap this up quickly so that we can get on to some Q&A, because there's been some good questions asked already. The first thing I wanted to go, you go on to the next slide, Melissa, is I think as Claire noted, there are questions that remain, right? Planning inevitably begets more planning, right? Many of the questions that Claire highlighted need to be tended to in the near term. Some are going to take longer periods of time. It's important to remember this vision offers us a roadmap for work over the coming years. It gives us a lot of direction. It doesn't answer every question about how, when, sequence, priority. That's work that we still have to kind of work through probably on an ongoing basis. So it's the starting point. This year, 2024, is really the year we're laying the ground for further work. I think of it as like a platforming year. We're discussing it with you. We're discussing it among ourselves. We're really trying to make sure we fully digest what we need to do and what we're committing to with this. That said, I just want to highlight a few things that are underway or will soon be underway. We're right now assessing budget and staffing needs against the directions and objectives. HathiTrust is in really good financial shape. We've been establishing reserves to support strategic investments for a long time. The 2025 budget, which we'll share in the fall, will provide more insight into how we might be directing some of those investments to support especially new programmatic activity. We're also going to continue looking closely at the programs that we reviewed. The Shared Print Program and the HathiTrust Research Center are the two that we assessed as part of our efforts. Now, having established a strategic vision with clear specific foci on the collection and centering the collection, what we want to do is look at the successes we've had in those programs and make sure we're effectively deploying them towards the efforts we are laying, or the priorities we're laying out in centering the collection. And I think that in the coming years, what we're going to want to be thoughtful and rigorous about is evaluating how all of our potential work, how any new opportunity will support our goal of increasing access to collection, expansion and diversification, or enriching the collection itself, right? All of those are going to be key for us. Closer to the ground, there are a few projects that we are getting underway. They may not be very visible to you at this point, that are directly support some of the strategic goals. We're continuing to develop internal operations and business processes that helps manage the portfolio of work we do. This is building on work from our grant Building Resilience that was provided to us from the Mellon Foundation. We continue to be grateful for that support. It's giving us opportunities to invest in not just process management, but business intelligence and analytics, so that we can actually apply data to our decisions going forward as well. And then finally, I referenced Project Lend as efforts currently underway. We've also chartered a project that is looking to significantly improve or even overhaul our collection ingest processes. This is something that's been long overdue. We expect that as it gets going, we're going to be seeking input from our libraries that have deposited in the past or intended to deposit materials in HathiTrust. So I just say stay tuned for those things. I don't have specific timelines on the outreach for those. And then I also mentioned that we'll be doing some more recruitment that includes a collection strategist, but also some other staffing to support process management. We have a project manager position open, and we'll have a business intelligence role open later this year, I believe. So last thing, you can put on the next slide, as we enter this next period of our history, I want to just emphasize that we're committing to creating a collective future with you. We need to do that by continuing to establish trust. We need to do it with a fair amount of humility and also accountability to all of you as well. Supporting scholarship and research in the years ahead is going to require us to think more about equitable modes of access, more diverse and inclusive collections. Developments in the legal and computational domains are going to continue to come at us at a rapid pace, and we need to think critically about the ethics of engaging in particular practices or in operating particular services, and how we can continue to do so while developing transformative uses of the corpus. These are commitments we're taking really seriously, and I extend that commitment to you today. We're not just committing to specific goals or objectives here, but to ensuring that HathiTrust remains responsive to change, committing to maintaining this as something that is aligned with and valuable for our members, continuing to develop common good services that strive to create a general public good for the benefit of users worldwide. Folks are seeking to understand the world, its past, and its potential futures, and HathiTrust is a way for folks to help get a foothold on that. So I'll just close with that and say thank you for your continued support. And I want to say thanks to Claire for joining me with this and for attempting to answer some of the many brilliant questions that are coming our way now. So thanks.
And yes, we do have many questions, and I will encourage people to continue to add questions to the Q&A feature. I'm going to start right at the top in the order received. So first one coming in is, how will you incorporate EDI principles in enriching texts and metadata? And I'll pose it to either Claire, Mike, whoever wants to pick up the question.
I can start, and Claire, if you have anything you want to offer, that'll be great, because I would say there's no single answer to this. One of the things that we have been talking about a lot internal to the HathiTrust staff over the last several years is whenever we are creating something new, whenever we're thinking about a new project or trying to think about a new service, we were trying to ask ourselves, or keep equity centered in that process. So asking ourselves, where does the benefit accrue? How can we maximize benefit for the greatest number of people, of groups? Where is it that we might be inadvertently disadvantaging some groups? And those are principles to be thinking about. I would say that around enriching text and metadata, I can give you a more practical example of something we've been looking at and talking about than I can talking about the principles specifically. So for example, We're well aware that when metadata comes to HathiTrust, it does not always, it may over time be updated or may not represent the most current terminology. There may be records out there, perhaps in WorldCat, that represent more current terminology. And there's lots of places where outdated terminology and often quite offensive terms still appear in metadata records. So one of the things that we have been doing more recently is in our metadata quality improvement program is trying to create a pathway for libraries to look at their records and make corrections based on what they see in the HathiTrust collection. But I think that examining, one very straightforward thing is we'll be examining metadata at scale to look for these kinds of outdated terminologies. That's one path. I think there's probably others, but I would just want to pause there because I think it's a hard question to answer more generally. It's one that I would say, in each case, and as we establish this, we have to think about equity at every step. So
I think there's also some great opportunities before us. And, you've talked about, Mike, work that the community has already expressed a strong interest in doing together. The other thing that comes to mind for me, and this is just Claire speaking, is Claire, not officially for Hathi, but there are major changes to the Americans with Disability Act, Title II, that are coming down the pipeline. Most of us have got about 2 years to come into compliance for a lot of the material that we're providing for teaching and learning. Hathi has a really strong history here. We've had an accessible text request service, but I think this presents an opportunity and a challenge for us to really significantly accelerate and advance that work. So I feel as though there are a couple things that are just going to kind of, become compelling and obvious in our landscape.
Another question, metadata related. If the metadata you enhance came out of WorldCat, will you provide OCLC with copies of the enhanced records? And similarly, someone also had the comment, if you share enhanced records with OCLC, please review the agreement to ensure records can be reused without OCLC's involvement or permission. So, Mike.
Yeah, I wanted to say thanks to Brian Schottlander for asking this great question about metadata workflows and the ecosystem. So as we started talking about the goal of enhancing records and enriching records, one of the things we've acknowledged is the importance of not continuing to get out of sync with other metadata stores, right? We don't need to start creating multiple silos of pseudo-canonical records, right? That there needs to be an understood source of canonical records, and there needs to be ways for us to continue to flow data from from our site to others as well. So I'm not answering yes or no to your question, Brian. I'm saying that, yeah, we need to kind of make sure that we are finding ways for data to stay accurate in all places and not in a single location. I did want to, though, also add that part of this is not just about enhancing MARC records that might appear in WorldCat. Part of this might also be about extending our metadata models to incorporate more data that might be derived from the corpus. And I can give one really practical example of this. For years now, the HathiTrust Research Center has developed a process to extract data from the collection. It's a product known as Extracted Features. It provides us with page-level information about every page in HathiTrust. It includes statistical data, but it also includes information like, does this page have an image on it? Or is there an image caption on this page? Or actually, I might be making that last one up, but it also tries to infer languages that appear on different pages, which is inevitably going to be richer than what we might find in a single metadata or MARC record for a title. So part of this might be about us looking to how we can make that kind of data more useful in our context. And some of that might be used to enhance metadata records down the road, but I would want to make sure that that data does not exist only for the benefit of HathiTrust, but also for the broader community. So on that last comment about sharing enhanced records with OCLC, make sure records can be used or reused without OCLC's involvement or permission. Yeah, that's a really important part of this. We have a metadata sharing policy, which really seeks to make sure all of our metadata is broadly open as possible. But there are also complications in the metadata environment with regard to metadata records and how they are used and how they're shared with us, as well as how they're shared with OCLC. So I won't try to parse that out right now, but just want to say, yeah, we need to make sure that we get this material as broadly useful as possible throughout.
Go on to the next question then. This is anonymous attendee. Is there a timeline or roadmap available for controlled digital lending exploration?
So I have a couple of ways of answering that. And one is to say there is no commitment to do controlled digital lending, right? Because we have an open lawsuit right now that contests the legality of that. I think that that lawsuit's unfortunate. I think it was decided over broadly. I think it can impact libraries in ways that go well beyond the facts of the case. And our amicus brief and the appeal says that. But that said, I think one of the things we do know is that libraries and users in particular appreciated having extended access during the emergency, during the pandemic. And that's one of the reasons that Project Lend got started in looking at are there ways that we could continue to expand that type of access and make it available to users. So there's not a particular timeline for implementation because it's not clear what an implementation could even look like, one that we could do responsibly. What I will say though is in some ways that means the exploration is actually underway, but it's a really close examination of like watching what the court does, trying to understand how those rulings could impact our decisions, and thinking of most critically we can do now within the parameters of the law. Earlier, I referenced resource sharing. Right now, that is not a service that we have readily available, but I believe there may be pathways that we could explore for enabling services that could support resource sharing using HathiTrust. I don't want to commit to that right now because a lot of the details will have to get figured out for how we could do that. But I will say that it is something that we are actively looking at and examining and trying to think about as it's coming out of the Project Lend project. So.
Right. Another one. This is from Emily Gore. Do you anticipate that new working groups will be formed to help move this work forward?
Thanks, Emily. I would say possibly. I don't know what they would be right now. One of the things that Claire alluded to was the need to take a look at our governance processes and make sure our decision-making structures were aligned and effective and efficient. But if I look at the strategic vision, if I look at the directions, practically any one of the bullet points in there has implications that we need to have input from the community on. And some of these might be more important than others, so we might well be putting together working groups that could help inform decision-making going forward or help provide perspective. But some of these might be, I would say some of these might be like, let's call them more official, chartered, and might be more, more exploratory in nature. Others might be short-term. So as we explore the development of a service or as we start to try to implement something new, we might call upon a working group or a small advisory group to be put together to help advise on the practicalities and the details, and as we go through that. So yes, what they will be, don't know. We have a new chair of the program steering committee, Rice Majors, who I think might be on the call here, who starts in his role in a few weeks. We'll be meeting with Rice over the next few weeks to talk a little bit about the agenda for the program steering committee and how we can rely on them to help advise on these issues. So.
Okay, another one here. Are there plans on the horizon to enhance text analysis methodologies for users? As stated earlier, with 18 billion, I think 18 million is probably closer, 18 million items in the HathiTrust corpus so far. There really aren't competitors, and researchers, especially with large language models being so prevalent, are interested in supporting their own machine learning endeavors with such a large corpus.
Yeah, great question. Yeah, it is millions, not billions. Billions of pages, billions of tokens. It's a really good question. I think the answer has to be that we have to do that. I don't know that there are specific concrete plans in place right at this moment. Part of what we're doing in continuing on our program review is trying to really take stock of what's our capacity to do that now. A lot of the processes we have in place for making the collection accessible for computation are built around a service model that made assumptions about what technological capabilities there were 10, 12 years ago. And part of what we're trying to do now is kind of come to grips with the moment now where in order to do certain kinds of analysis that people want to do or certain kinds of corporations wish to do, there needs to be much more unfettered access, or the data needs to be made available to much more powerful computing engines than we've had in the past. So there does need to be some strategy developed around this. I don't know that I have a clear answer for it. I think what I would say is It will have to entail some partnerships and some work with other organizations and academic as well as potentially non-academic. It has to be done, though, in a way that we believe is responsible and can help generate, something that's really useful and has, we have a clear understanding of the impact of that potential on users beyond the immediate research team that might be using the data in that context. So that's not to say we're going to vet every research question. It is to say we have to think critically about how we develop a process for make these materials available in those modes. So.
And I would add, in addition to, it was predicated around the technologies available, it was also predicated on our understanding of the legal situation at the time.
That's right.
And when we started doing that work, these many, 10, 11, 12, 13 years ago, it was a very different legal landscape at the time. And, things have moved on, but we can't make any fast assumptions or rapid changes without also considering the legal implications of that, ethical and legal.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it reminds me that, yeah, when we started 10, 12 years ago with HathiTrust's Research Center, we hadn't actually had a case decided in our favor in the Authors Guild case. The Authors Guild case made clear that text analysis at large scale was fair use. Where we are now is we have various organizations engaging in lawsuits in order to claw back that kind of work, right? To be able to claw back some and diminish the power of fair use in this space for artificial intelligence, for example. So it's still pretty fraught. It's something we have to pay attention to, and it's a very different environment now. So.
Yep, one more coming in from Brian. Apropos of Claire's good point about HBCU, tribal colleges, institutions, by and large, not participating, can you remind us if your current membership structure is budget sensitive?
It attempts to be. The question is whether it's budget sensitive enough for all libraries. And I think that raises, but I think there's another question at play here, another issue at play. Claire alluded to making some attempts to have conversations with various communities that weren't successful. Part of that isn't just about whether or not our cost model is budget sensitive. It's also about recognition, or about, are we thought about as a service that is useful in particular contexts? And I will say, I think it's often easy. I've engaged in this erroneous thinking in the past, like HathiTrust is the solution for all of your problems, right? Of course you need HathiTrust in your library, because why wouldn't you? And in fact, for a lot of organizations, a lot of academic institutions, it's not necessarily that valuable for some things that are really key priorities. It's not to say it wouldn't be great, but there might be other problems that need to be solved as well. And I think that's what we really need to understand. And it's also what I mean by approaching our work with more humility, right? Really trying to understand that if we're going to work with different communities, we need to understand what their needs are, and we need to listen and not just assume about our work. So,
and this is another example, I think, of where we really, during this visioning process, reckoned with, as important as we feel Hathi is, and as valuable to the members, we really did reckon deeply with the fact that it really is a node in a much, much larger system. And I think of many of the directions actually that we've articulated, copyright is another example, indicate how important it's going to be for us not to assume we are doing the work, but to be doing the work in collaboration with a larger group of partners.
Here's another coming in, talking about reusing and sharing metadata. I just had a look at the HathiTrust portal and did not find IIIF interfaces. Are there any thoughts of implementing IIIF, and if not, why not?
So IIIF
Aaron's on vacation. Sorry.
It's okay. This question has come up before, so I think a couple of thoughts on there. We've certainly talked about it. My comment, the answer I've given in the past, I think is still important, which is making sure that our services and the functionalities we employ are responsive to user needs, right, and specific use cases that we can see. To date, IIIF has come up, but it's not been the most highly asked for set of features that comes in. Some of the use cases that are often proffered there are about use of special collections materials, not published materials. That's not to say that a IIIF viewer can't be implemented and couldn't be useful. It's just simply to say, as we establish priorities, it's never been at the highest level there. One thing I will say, though, and I want to harken back to conversations coming out of the Project Lend research, one of the things that's really made clear to us is that HathiTrust exists as one node among many in the information landscape, and users increasingly need to find ways to make it simpler, or for it to be simpler for them to access collections regardless of where they are. So put another way, HathiTrust right now exists as a destination portal. Go to HathiTrust, get what you need. We need to be thinking more and more about how HathiTrust can be accessed, discovered, used. Content can be found in multiple locations, not solely on HathiTrust. IIIF may well be one of the pathways for that. So I'm not trying to, diss it. I'm just trying to say we have to think about where that sits in priorities and how it satisfies user needs. So.
I do not see any more questions at this moment. So if you have some, the Q&A is still open. We are almost at time.
If there's a lull, can I take a moment just to acknowledge both Mike and all of the staff at HathiTrust who they were really, really fantastic and deeply engaged in the strategic visioning process. And, I'm about to leave the HathiTrust board. It was an incredible opportunity to get to work with them. It was having a chance to really see what they did during the pandemic when the team launched that e-test service was really, it was a high point for me in my career to be able to work with such an outstanding group of professionals. So kudos to all of them. And I think we have one of the members of the A21 leadership team. I think Megan Hurst is on the webinar too. So Megan and Christine were just outstanding to work with. And This was a monumental task to try to get our arms around what were all of the possible directions for HathiTrust, and just a great set of partners. So thanks to all of you.
Thanks, Claire. It was great working with you. You're not done yet. We still have 6 months, and you've got a lot of work ahead of you.
Yeah. Nominations for the HathiTrust board, back to Emily's question. We're always going to be looking to nominate people both for PSC and the board. So please give that a thought. That was like the perfectest timing ever.
Yeah. I'm going to stop the recording, but we will stay online. And if anybody has any more questions, we will stay online for a few minutes to answer them for you. All right.
Y'all, thanks so much for coming this afternoon. I really appreciate your spending time with us.